All right, good morning, everyone. This is Sue Clark with the Florida Department of Transportation Central Office. Today we have a special guest. We have Ed Safford. Hopefully I said your name correctly, Ed. He will be presenting some information, new requirements regarding impervious surface cover that came about because of the NOAA Fisheries biological opinion associated with the 2012 nationwide permits. This is very important to the department. We want to make sure that we are providing the appropriate information to the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure the nationwide permits are verified appropriately when we use those types of permits. So with that, Ed, I'm going to pass this over to you. I believe you have control of the screen.
That's great. Thanks, Stu. I've got two screens. Which one can you see right now? The one with one slide or the one with two slides?
I see the one with both slides on there right now.
Is it down to one?
Yes, we're down to one slide. Perfect.
Right. Well, my name is Ed Safford. I'm a project manager here in the Pensacola Regulatory Office. Talk to you a little bit about the new requirements from this biological opinion, particularly this one here, impervious surface cover. We've got a number of acronyms in the presentation. I'll try to define those as we go. If there's any audio or visual problems, please let me know if you can't see anything or can't hear me well enough. But if we could leave any questions to the end, that'd be great. So, like to mention, this is as a result of the NOAA biological opinion on the 2012 nationwide permits. So we'll go over the status of the implementation guidance. I guess you've seen it. That's been sent out as an attachment. We'll talk about the implementation guidance for a number of protective measures that have come about as a result of this. I'm just moving this screen there. As a result of this biological opinion, we'll talk about ORM data entry and reporting. ORM is our tracking system. It's where we input all of the data for our pending and finalized permits. It's got every action we do in there, everything about jurisdiction, location, and all. We'll talk about applying this thing called the 1% threshold, some of the reporting and meetings that we're required to do as a result of these new protective measures. And I'll provide you some examples of how this impervious surface cover requirement will be done. So there have been a few protective measures we've implemented since this 2014 biological opinion. Where this list of items came from is when the 2012 nationwide permits came out. Our nationwide permits come out every 5 years, and all the agencies review those. When NOAA Fisheries reviewed our 2012 nationwides, they felt that as a result of allowing us to use those, there could be some type of jeopardy opinion towards the continued existence of one of the species under their purview. So a lot of back and forth ensued between the Corps and NOAA Fisheries after that. And as a result of that, we got this 2014 biological opinion. It requires a number of protective measures to make sure that we don't jeopardize the continued existence or have an adverse modification to critical habitat as a result of us using these nationwide permits. In May of last year, we added a special condition to our nationwide permits concerning injured or killed individuals of listed species. We've done some regional coordination with NOAA about the regional conditions that we use here in Jacksonville District for our nationwide permits. We created an information package. It's on our website if anyone's not seen it. It's for prospective users of the nationwide permits, and it's to remind them that General Condition 18 requires them to submit a PCN, a pre-construction notification, even for projects that otherwise wouldn't, if it could be within the critical habitat or it could affect species under the purview of NOAA Fisheries. So it's just reminding people that sometimes PCNs are required when you might not think they are because of the CSA requirement. Again, our data tracking system, ORM, NOAA had some concerns with some of the data that was in there. It's a massive database, so we're performing additional quality assurance to try to make sure that our data in that system is as up to date as possible. NOAA wants to remind us that we have the discretion to require wetland compensatory mitigation for losses less than 1/10 of an acre. That's already a general condition of our nationwide permits, but we have that discretion because at times the Corps feels it's not warranted if it's low quality wetlands, very small impact, less than 1/10 of an acre. We don't always require compensatory mitigation. NIMS would like us to consider that more often. We've got this information requirement for pre-construction notifications for nationwide's. General Condition 31 is already in there, but what that does is it reminds folks that even though a pre-construction notification may otherwise allow someone to go forward with a project, if there could be species that NOAA Fisheries has concern over within that project site, someone can't move out without the Corps concluding that required ESA consultation. And I'll note here, this is all about NOAA Fisheries species that are listed or within the purview of Fish and Wildlife Service. We're not talking about it all. This is just completely NOAA Fisheries or National Marine Fisheries Service species. And then the protective measure, we'll talk about it in detail today, is this tracking impervious surface cover norm. And this just came out just last month. So what this implementation guidance, really what it covers is we have 3 new protective measures that we need to incorporate. We're going to track additions of impervious surface cover within 10-digit HUCs, these watersheds that are inhabited by NOAA-listed species that result from activities authorized by our nationwide permits, our regional general permits, our programmatic general permits, and all of our individual permits. Those are standard permits and letters of permissions, SPs and LOPs. So while this requirement originally came out of the nationwides and the biological opinion that we got from NIMS on the nationwides, it's now expanded to cover everything we do within the confines of these types of permits. It's every permit, and it's not just the nationwides. I'll go into a little bit more about that in a moment. The Corps, as districts individually and headquarters, we have to provide NOAA with reports every 6 months that explains our ORM data on these permitted activities and talks about how much additional impervious surface cover we've added as a result of our permit actions. And we also have to have mandatory meetings between the districts and the individual regional offices to discuss this data. So just included this map in here. You'll see in Florida, we've got a lot of these colored areas. The beige areas in the whole center part of the state or part of the country, they don't need to worry about these impervious surface cover requirements. However, in the colored areas along the coastline, any of these hydrologic unit codes, these watersheds that flow out to critical habitat or areas inhabited by NIMS species, this is where this requirement applies. We have a lot of area we don't have to worry about. Central part of the peninsula, once you get off the coast in the actual coastal plain, those areas are not going to be areas we worked in. But it could be worse if you look at what Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then out in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, those areas, they're going to be working with NIMS, with NOAA Fisheries quite a bit more. Just a little zoom in here on these watersheds where we'll need to consider tracking impervious surface cover. So the purple highlighted areas, these are the ones we're working with. Again, the central area, we don't have to do any additional work, additional tracking in those areas. And outside these river floodplains, within the panhandle, again, areas that we don't have to worry about this new requirement. However, within all the purple highlighted areas, we do. So when we're talking about impervious surface cover, within the biological opinion, what they used was a definition that came from a stormwater management report, and it defines it as a hard surface area which either prevents or retards the entry of water into the soil. and this is the exact definition that came from the biological opinion. It gives a few examples: rooftops, walkways, paved areas, gravel roads, oiled surfaces. So that's what we had to work with, and we've tried to further break it down from there. But what you'll see down here at the bottom line is it's a surface that prevents or retards the infiltration of water into soil. Some examples of what this impervious surface cover, how we'll see it: any type of paving, also precast concrete or slabs, abutments that are made of concrete. Some bank stabilization projects, if it's a concrete lined ditch, for instance, or it's riprap that's been grouted, anything that will prevent water from flowing between the rock or pieces of concrete, that would be impervious. And of course, anything with a concrete pad or, again, paving, house pads, driveways, sidewalks, anything like that will be included. So it's just as important to understand what is an impervious surface cover. So anything temporary, even if it is impervious at the time it's there, as long as it's not going to be a permanent structure or fill, we're not going to track that as impervious surface cover. Fill for slopes, that's going to be important to DOT and other linear projects. Lawns, parks, anything that can be filled and still maintain vegetation. Mechanized land clearing, types of techniques, whether it's porous pavers or mats that are specifically designed to allow water infiltration. Again, water can flow through, it's not going to be impervious. Riprap. If a boat ramp is constructed, for instance, with loose rock or metal grate, again, water to move through. Bioengineering techniques, whether it's log veins or willow planting, obviously that will still allow the water to perk through, so we would not count that. So the bottom line is going to be it's any project feature specifically designed to allow the infiltration of water. So what types of projects does this apply to? Initially, NOAA Fisheries was very concerned about these 8 nationwides here, and they focused on them initially. But again, it's expanded now to cover any Department of the Army permit that authorizes discharges of fill material that result in permanent losses and impervious surface cover. So that's going to be, of course, the other nationwides, not just those 8 listed above. It's going to be all of the nationwide permits that apply, regional and programmatic general permits, and of course individual permits, like I mentioned earlier, the standard permits or letters of permission. But what doesn't it apply to? Well, structures that are just regulated by the Corps under the Rivers and Harbors Act, Section 10 waters, things like piers, piles, buoys, marinas, floating docks are not going to create impervious surface cover. Same with dredging. Important here, fills that are below the mean high water line or the ordinary high water line, whether it's in tidal or non-tidal waters, as long as it's below that mean high water line, it would not create new impervious surface cover. Same with excavation activities, no new ISC from that. Again, any temporary fills, even if they're pervious at the time they're installed, as long as they're temporary and will be removed, we won't count those. Unregulated activities, an important one here in the examples, bridges, for instance, the Corps does not regulate those, that's the Coast Guard, so that would not create any new additional impervious surface cover. Work in uplands or non-jurisdictional wetlands, again, would not be considered ISC that we need to track. So what we're going to track and enter in the Corps Data Entry System, ORM, these are going to be additions or removal of impervious surface cover that result from regulated activities in waters and wetlands. So it's not going to be all impervious surface cover that may result from a project that we permit. We're only going to track the additions of ISC that are within those listed 10-digit HUCs, basically those ones that NIMS has provided to us as the ones they're concerned with. So it has to be in those locations, and it also has to be associated with permanent losses, again, nothing temporary, and it has to be directly as a result of our regulated activities. So a little example here, if you look at this entire photograph as a core authorized project. Massive project. We've got a wetland stream that runs across this part of the photo. We've got some impervious surface cover as a result of the core permit. Got a road crossing here with some ISC, same as here and here. So these 3 road crossings all involve impervious surface cover. You've got a lot of impervious surface cover here for this parking lot, building, parking lot, road, but all that area is in uplands. So the core, even though it is part of this overall project, it's not regulated by us because it's in uplands. We would not track that. We'd only track the impervious surface cover in these 3 wetland crossings here. So the 1% threshold I mentioned earlier. What NOAA Fisheries did was they looked at, I guess, the most recent data they had, which was from 2011, the USGS land cover information they had, and they determined what the baseline acreage of impervious surface cover was in each one of these 10-digit HUCs that they're using. And then they calculated, of course, 1% of that baseline acreage. So if it was 100 acres of impervious surface cover within that watershed, that 1%, of course, would be 1 acre. So as we enter, the core project managers, as we enter additions and removals of impervious surface cover, we'll put it in ORM, and ORM will calculate as we go what the net additions add up to and whether we're getting close to that 1% threshold. And that's where NIMS feels there may be an additional effect to species that they have under their purview. So as we put it into our data entry system, we'll see if we're getting close within a watershed to this important 1% threshold. We'll see the amounts as we enter them. We'll also see a percent over the baseline if we've already exceeded that baseline. We can see that when we input this data, when we issue permits, and we'll also be running reports so we can see that information as we go. What will happen if this 1% threshold is exceeded within a HUC? We're not looking at the state of Florida, we're looking at just this individual HUC. It's indicated on the impact screen as well as those ORM reports. We'll know when we hit that number if we do. The core project manager is going to evaluate their permit application, whether it's a nationwide pre-construction notification, a regional general permit verification request, or an individual permit application. We're going to do that in the normal manner that we do. This is not going to create any new consultations, any new coordination up front with NIMS for projects that we otherwise wouldn't coordinate with them on. We're not going to be coordinating. What will happen, though, is we'll do our normal evaluation to see whether the proposed activity may affect the listed species or its critical habitat. So what the Corps can do is we'll consider if that 1% threshold has been exceeded, if there's any additional effect. If the 1% threshold has been exceeded in the location, in that HUC that this project lies within, we'll determine at that time, will the project affect or may affect listed species or critical habitat. We'll initiate our normal Section 7 consultation like we already would. The only thing that will be different is we'll have to include this sentence down here at the bottom, this statement here advising NIMS that within this HUC, the permitted impervious surface cover within waters of the U.S. in this HUC has exceeded 1% over the baseline. So that's really the only difference. Again, no new consultations. We won't be consulting in areas we wouldn't have originally. This is just one extra step if we exceed that threshold in that location. At the end of this 6-month period that started at the beginning of May, we'll have to go back to NIMS and give them a report. We do that at the district level here with the Southeast Regional Office in St. Pete with NOAA Fisheries. It's also being done at the headquarters level. After we submit those reports, we'll be meeting with NIMS again at the district and the headquarters level within 30 days. And the purpose of those meetings, they're mandatory, they have to happen, but it's to discuss the data and determine whether we need to have new permit conditions or if there might be new consultations required as a result of maybe thresholds being met or being close to being met, or if we need to do, if NIMS needs to impose new protective measures. And that all goes back to protection of listed species or, of course, critical habitat. So I'll give you some examples here of how we'll be implementing this. First one here involves partial impervious surface for a project. Well, an applicant will say it's FDOT proposes to build a new field office, and we all feel it may qualify for verification under Nationwide Permit 39. So the pre-construction notification comes in, and it proposes permanent fill over 4/10 of an acre of wetlands for this project. Of that, 2/10 of an acre is for the building itself. The other 2/10 is for lawn, landscaping, and then the parking area is going to be done with porous pavers, like in the photograph here, allows water infiltration, would not be impervious. So when we issued that permit, which would happen in record time, the ISC addition we put in ORM would be 2/10 of an acre. It would just be for the building, because the other fill and wetlands, it's permanent, it's within the HUC we're concerned about with NIMS. However, it's pervious because it's lawn, landscaping, and porous pavers. Another one, the applicant may be FDOT, a new highway. A little bit larger project, so this one be reviewed as an individual permit, standard permit application to fill 2.5 acres of non-tidal wetlands for a new highway. So when you break down the components of it, it looks like 1 acre is going to be wetland loss for road paving, another 1/2 acre of wetland loss for concrete lined ditches, and then another acre of wetland fill, and that loss would be for grass side slopes and for median. So what we'd enter into ORM, and again at the end of this process, when all these numbers are finalized, when we issue the permit, the ISC addition we'd enter into ORM would be 1.5 acres. That would be for the permanent road paving, the permanent concrete lined ditches. It would not include this other acre here, because this again is area that allows infiltration, grass side slopes, grass median. Bank stabilization, very small area, 1/1500ths of an acre of riprap between the mean high water line and the high tide line is to stabilize 350 feet of bank along a bay. Now this riprap here is loose, it's not grouted, so the water, any rainfall can still infiltrate between the rocks. So there won't be any additional impervious surface cover added, because again, the riprap allows that infiltration. If this riprap was grouted, and the water would run off then down into surface waters, we would add this total footprint into ORM as new impervious surface cover. So we'd add 1/1500ths of an acre into ORM when we issued the permit. Another example for FDOT proposes to build a new road and bridge across wetlands and a river. So in this case, the permanent fill is proposed for 6/10 of an acre of wetlands for the road, another 1/10 of an acre of wetlands for concrete abutments where it meets the river. And then the new bridge over the river would have a footprint of 1/2 an acre actually over the water. Water's United States. However, the Corps does not regulate the bridge. That's the Coast Guard's job. So all we would enter when we issued this permit would be the 6/10 of an acre for the road and the 1/10 of an acre for the concrete abutments. So 0.7 acres added into ORM, and that would be the total. A boat ramp here, I won't get down into the details here, but what this really involves is area above and below the mean high water line. So the first part of this concrete slab, 20-foot by 30-foot area below the mean high water, that's not impervious surface cover because again it's below the mean high. But within our jurisdiction there's also another section of concrete slab. It's 20 feet wide and only 10 feet long. It's above the mean high water, but it's below the high tide line. So it's still within the Corps' jurisdiction. That part obviously still requires a permit. And it is impervious surface cover because it's within our jurisdiction and it's a concrete slab and it's permanent. So we would enter just that small fraction of an acre there for that portion of the boat ramp, not the portion of the boat ramp below the mean high. While we're required to add additions of impervious surface cover in ORM, we're also required to track removal of impervious surface cover. This probably won't be a common item that we run into, but if it does, we need to track it. And I've got this example here. If the applicant proposes to fill material, in this case 3 acres of non-tidal wetlands for an oil well pad. It's permanent fill. And there's a couple of oil pads that are non-functional now, totaling 6 acres. They propose to remove those. In ORM, we'd add the 3 acres of new impervious surface cover added, and we'd also add in the 6 acres of impervious surface cover removed. Now, when that impervious surface cover, those original well pads, are removed, it does not have to result in the creation of wetlands. It only has to be a pervious area. It can still be uplands. It can still be outside our jurisdiction. It just has to be a pervious area at the end of the project. What this might do, and the benefit of having removal in there, is it reduces the chance this 1% threshold might be met in that HUC, and that's important because if NIMS feels that once this 1% threshold is exceeded, if additional consultation or additional protective measures are required, removal could mitigate some of those losses and reduce the chance that we hit that threshold, which might make consultation a little bit simpler with NOAA Fisheries on that. So that's the quick summary there. And if anyone has any questions.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, Ed. I think that was a very useful information. If you have any questions, so I don't unmute everyone at the same time so we all talk on top of each other, if you can either raise your hand or put your question in your chat box, and I'll be able to unmute you as appropriate. Okay. Anyone? Okay, here we have a question. Hold on just a second. Brent, let me unmute you and see if this will work. I lost the unmute, so I'm going to go ahead and ask the question for you. Where can we get a KMZ or GIS file of the HUC boundaries?
I could look into that for you. We have a PDF right now of the HUC boundaries. We've got them listed under their 10-digit codes. We can send that out to you, and I can look into providing a KMZ as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other questions?
I can move back to any slides if anyone has any questions on any of the individual slides.
Brett, I'm trying to unmute you, but it says you have to enter in the PIN number, so it's not allowing me to do so. Okay, here. Okay. Brett, if you can enter in the PIN number, and then I'll be able to unmute you so you can ask the question. And I don't know what the PIN number is. I think it should be on the webinar information.
It's 100.
It's 122. Can you give that a shot, and I can try to unmute you? If not, type in really fast, and I can ask your question. Okay, for whatever reason, it says the PIN for you, Brent, is 114. Try that. I think everyone has their own audio PIN. I don't see any other questions, Ed. Okay, here's the question. Will the project manager determine whether mitigation for ISE is required, and will the mitigation be subject to the 2008 mitigation rule?
The 2008 mitigation rule is only for compensatory wetland mitigation, so that wouldn't apply to this. It's the project manager. You mean the core project manager, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Right. The only way we would we would require that as if it came about as a result of the coordination on that specific project with NOAA Fisheries. It wouldn't be something that we would necessarily look for up front as mitigation for additional ISC. So as it went, if a 1% threshold was exceeded in that HUC and NIMS came back, they could potentially say this is something we would like to see, but the Corps isn't going to be requiring that upfront as mitigation for additional impervious surface cover.
Okay.
I have a question, unless he's ready.
Yeah, go ahead, Katasha.
And my question is, how are you expecting the applicant to provide this information to you? Are you looking for graphics, and would that be on the same sort of plans as the wetland impacts, or is it some other format that you're looking for to get the information?
That's a good question. I wanted to touch on that as well. We've just started implementing this just a few weeks ago, so we haven't seen a whole lot of projects come in where we've worked through it yet. But for applications, it would be helpful to have that information provided, maybe as at least a figure, just a total of impervious surface cover that's proposed. If it could be shown as a different layer, maybe hatching on drawings, that would be helpful as well. The final number won't be required by us until we're ready to issue and put that number into ORM. So if a project is going to change over time, that number, of course, will change. So wouldn't be as useful up front, but it could prevent us having to ask for it at the last minute, right when we're ready to issue, because it is something we have to include and have to put into ORM. So I guess the bottom line for it, at least a number. If you've got the acreage you can provide, and then if it can be shown on drawings, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, that was similar to the question Martin from our Turnpike office had the same question. Do we need to provide a detailed breakdown with the permit application? So I think that information, is there some kind of format that you all want us to fill out, or we just put it in there as maybe an attachment with a new figure? Is that how you are expecting things to show up for the reviewers?
Right. Yeah, again, we're still working through how we're going to implement it. What I think is the most important thing is to have that acreage in there. And if the Corps has any questions about it, we can follow up. If it's included on drawings, that would allow us to verify it up front. So on the plan views, if we have a different hatching or a separate drawing that shows which area is ISC and which area is not, that will allow us to rapidly verify it.
Okay.
But the bottom line is just to get that number into us.
And Ed, this is just one of the things that I don't know if you're familiar with, but we have the efficient transportation decision-making process where we partner with our agencies pretty early on, including National Marine Fisheries Service, because this requirement, kind of stemmed from their needs in the permitting arena that you all have the responsibility for. Hopefully we can have some of this information discussed with the National Marine Fisheries for those projects where we have the potential to impact these HUCs. We can have that discussion with them in advance, so by the time we get to the permit application, we can have something hopefully from the National Marine Fisheries Service to present to you as a part of the permit application to make it easier on everybody.
Definitely. No, that would be a big help, and I think early on, National Marine Fisheries Service won't have a tremendous amount of concern until we start getting close within the individual HUCs to that 1% threshold. So once we hit that or go over it, then their level of concern will go up and all. And what could happen is if a project takes a good while to work its way through the evaluation, both at NIMS and with the Corps, early on may not be close to that 1% threshold, but maybe later in the project, you could be approaching it or exceed it. So that it's kind of an evolution during the time the project's being evaluated.
We have another question. Can we get a copy of this presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll just send that to you.
That sounds good. And we're also recording this session, and we'll post it onto our website. I think this is really good information. A lot of folks were not able to sign in. Unfortunately, I had to change the format last minute, so I know we had a lot of interest, but I think at the time of the call, we only have 18 attendees. Brent, if you could put in your chat box if you still need to be unmuted, I think it will work now. Okay, Brent, you are unmuted.
All right, very good. Thank you. Sorry I had to dial back in there. I didn't realize I had to put in the audio pin. But I'm just concerned long term on this. I mean, eventually, you know, with growth, you're going to hit the 1% in all these basins, and so it's going to become a real problem down the road. I guess going back to the scenario number 4, when you talked about the bridges there, you know, even though you have an impervious surface, the bridge is above the water line, and so technically the resource, while there's a shading impact there, the actual resource hasn't been filled or removed. There's just, you know, I guess is the point of the impervious surface to track the new runoff volume, or is it to track the actual impact to the resource?
You know, I see exactly what you're saying. That it could definitely be argued that that a bridge would not really create impervious surface cover like let's say a road would. The point I wanted to make on that was just the bridge itself is not a regulated activity regulated by the Corps. So that's immediately why it kicks out. Other projects, if you've got elevated structures in wetlands, we deal with, and this wouldn't necessarily be an FDOT issue, but we deal with elevated houses sometimes. And depending on the elevation, how we look at that as ISC, we're working through that. But for the purpose of this, for FDOT, I wanted to note again, automatically kick it out rather than anybody having that debate on whether a bridge or a portion of a bridge even is going to add impervious surface cover. It's automatically not, just because we don't regulate it. So, and then your first point about over time, these hucks will eventually all, the way growth is going, will all eventually exceed that 1% threshold. That's true. The one hope we have is this biological opinion is only on the current nationwides that came out in 2012. Again, they come out every 5 years. So in 2017, we'll have new nationwides coming out. This may not be a requirement with those new nationwides. It may, as a result of consultation with NIMS on the new nationwides, we'll find out. But if it is, yes, you're right, all of these will eventually be exceeded. But again, this requirement may go away when the new nationwides come out. So we'll have to find that out then.
All right, Brent, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have one more question kind of following up on that 1% from Ginger Creighton in our District 7 office. Is there a current amount per basin available so we know which basins are nearing that 1% threshold?
Yes. Yeah, in the PDF we have right now, it shows all the hucks within the areas that each of our offices work, and I can send that to two, and hopefully we'll have a KMZ version of that. But
is that just a location of those? But will it show that it's nearing the 1%?
It actually, we have two versions of it. We have a version that just shows the 10-digit huck listed in each watershed and just that label, and then we have one that shows what the 1% is.
Okay.
It doesn't show a running total on it. It just shows what that 1% threshold. So some of the ones, the more highly developed watersheds in maybe a more urban area, that number's up in the hundreds of acres. But if you've got a rural watershed, it may be 10 acres, just because there's so little impervious surface cover there now, just really a few roads and whatever. So those areas, a large project could feasibly hit that 1% threshold just with one project. But I'll send you out that map that shows really what those numbers are, so you can kind of key in on which ones are through the result of maybe one project you're working on, if it might even come close to exceeding that 1%.
Okay, that sounds good, and I can share that out with everyone. Another question from our District 7 office. Can DOT get a copy of the semi-annual report to National Marine Fisheries Service? So is there a way for us to kind of, as you all are keeping that running total, with the 6-month requirement for you to have consultation with National Marine Fisheries Service, is there a way for us to have access to that information? Will you be providing that information to applicants and so forth, for the public, I should say?
Yeah, the information would be public information, and we can work out a mechanism to get that to you for your planning purposes. But again, if the 1% threshold is met, really it's time will tell how NOAA Fisheries sees that.
Right.
The only thing that will change immediately for us is we just need to include this information here at the bottom.
Okay. I'm looking around. Anyone else with any more questions? I have one more question. Okay, go ahead.
All right, Ed, I have one more question. This might sound a little bit crazy, but I'm just kind of curious if there's any sort of ditches that are wet all the time that we create as a result of a project, or a stormwater pond that's wet all the time. Would that also be considered an impervious area, or not necessarily?
No, neither of those. If it's just a vegetated ditch, just soil bottom, or a stormwater pond itself wouldn't count. If there was any
wet all the time.
That wouldn't be any new impervious surface cover for either of those.
Okay, I have one more question. This is from Benode in our District 4 office. For slope protection activities, impervious riprap, we will only include what is above minimum water elevation of the wetlands or ditches, right? Anything below would not count. Is this correct? So just that statement that you had, Ed, just to provide clarification about that mean high water or ordinary high water line below and above. I think that's what Benode is asking for.
Okay. If it was, the important line to be concerned with there would be the jurisdiction line. Sometimes the Corps is going to have, you're going to have your ordinary high water line in non-tidal wetlands and your mean high water line in tidal wetlands, but then the Corps' jurisdiction line would be above that. If the new impervious surface cover for this flood control project, if it was within the Corps' jurisdiction, it would be counted. So it not so much the effect of where it is in relation to that mean high water, if it's above it, as long as it's still within our jurisdiction. If it was below the mean high or below the ordinary high, we would not count it.
Okay, but no, does that answer your question? Yes, it does. Okay, good. Looking for more hands raised. I don't see any more questions, and I don't see any questions in the chat box, but let's just wait in case someone is typing in something. Okay, with that, I think we're going to close the meeting. Thank you, Ed. Very useful information. Appreciate your time in putting this together, and we will share this information to those who could not attend. If we had any additional questions, Ed, would you be the person to contact, or should we be going through Andy Kozlowskis or Deb Wesnick, perhaps, for questions about reporting this information to you as a part of our application?
If it's a general question just on this guidance or anything to do in general, you can send them to me. That's great. If it's an individual project question, you're working with a core project manager, it'd be best to go through that project manager, and then if the project manager has questions, I can coordinate with them if needed. Okay, that sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ed. Really appreciate this, and thank you all for attending. I think very good information, and we'll be reporting this information as part of our application packages. Thank you all so much. Thanks, everyone. All right, bye-bye. Bye.